Warning: potentially offensive language and content ahead, but I will censor it if necessary. I just felt that it explains the situation at hand and the setting. Not saying that using slurs or offensive language is right in any way. It also came out longer than I expected because I've only ever told this story to my girlfriend before now. This happened nearly a decade ago now. At the time of this story, I was 15, male, 5'5" and 132 pounds, which is around 60 kilograms. I was a wrestler, so I always knew my exact weight and kept myself extremely lean, but still had a fairly muscular build. I lived in a fairly small town of 50 to 60,000 people, and in my off-season, I did whatever I could to be somewhat active and outside. I had a friend, let's call him Blaze, who is really into disc golf and always asked me to come play with him and smoke a doobie while we were in the more secluded parts of the course. He was a couple years older than me, but no bigger than I was, just a not-so-great influence for me at that time. The small town only had 2 disc golf courses, one at a very public park near a middle school, or one at the edge of town in an older park that was much bigger. Obviously, we weren't smoking for everyone to see, so the edge of town sealed-off park it is. Little did I know that on Thursday afternoons, this park happened to be my town spot for gay men to meet and hook up in the parking lot. I live in the Midwest US, so these were not your stylish, young pretty guys. It was mostly guys aged 30 to 50 who were pretty big and aggressive looking. So, we finished the course and the joint, walking out of the woods anything but sober. We typically either just chilled in the grass or played catch after we finished up, until my buddy was more normal and ready to drive back. We noticed that there were way more cars in the parking lot than when we got there, and a lot of older guys sitting on their trunks of their cars or on tailgates, loosely grouped together. This very large hairy man in a tank top and his tall thin friend dressed like a biker gang member started to do the wolf whistle towards me and my friend. I get pretty uncomfortable, not because gay men whistled at me, because we had to walk in their direction, and I could feel the eyes of way more guys on me than I wanted. For a testosterone-filled weight room junkie teenager, I did not feel very safe here, knowing there were at least 30 guys in this group, and I could see in my peripheral that a fairly large portion were eyeing us closely as we walked toward the parking lot. I'll make it clear that I am not a fighter, and I would never intend to hurt anyone aside from self-defense, but I was definitely confident in myself to hold someone off. Us two were just so outnumbered and not in a sober state of mind, so anxiety made things much worse. A couple of them said some gross catcall-like things, more whistles, and that weird noise that rednecks make when they're excited about something or instigating, similar to the woo, but if Eric Catman screeched it. I think they had the idea that we were some people they met online and were coming to meet up. Being high, I didn't care what was going on. I just wanted to be safe and not the center of attention. When we got closer, the big hairy man who did the first wolf whistle said something like, "You think you can handle this?" And I just mumbled no thanks and tried to keep walking. He yelled back, "What was that, boy?" To which I just said more clearly, "No thanks, I'm not into that." He seemed offended and angrily said, "Not into what?" All I said was, "I'm sorry, I'm not gay." And he seemed to be offended by the word gay, again asking me to repeat myself in a very aggressive tone. So I corrected myself and said I'm not homosexual, and things escalated from here real quick. The man stepped forward from leaning against the truck and grabbed my wrist. He said, "We can fix that real quick." Don't get excited. I didn't do some cool fight move to attack him. Just a simple wrist roll and using that momentum, a quick push of the elbow to turn him around so that he would have his back to me and that I could get by without anything more. He said, "Touch me like that again and we'll get the both of you." Another guy made his way over to Blaze, who was much less than calm and chill type of stoner than I was. I can only describe what he did as one of those kicks or side steps off a wall, but to that guy's chest or abdomen. He started to run and yell, "Oh, fuck off!" and then the slur. Very quickly, bunches of guys began to stand up from their seats on the outside of their cars and motion our direction. I started booking it for the car too, and Mr. Skinny Biker Man was running right after us. Thank God, it was just him running and not multiple chasing us, or this story might be different. I was faster than Blaze, so I got ahead of him. And picture us running across a parking lot to his truck that was facing us, backed into a stall. I got around the passenger side quickly, with Blaze still about 100 feet from his truck. He tried to cut to the right and made it to the driver's side of his little S10, but Skinny cut him off and sent him to the left passenger side. I ran around the back of the truck as fast as I could to the driver door, and Blaze slid his keys across the roof to me. I hopped in, well aware that I did not want to be driving right now in this state of mind, much less in such a crazy situation, and even more less someone else's vehicle. Still, without thinking, I started it and skirted out of the parking lot while Skinny banged on the bed of the truck chasing. That's not the end. A truck and a car are on their way right behind me. Skinny jumped into the car that was in the back and the chase began. Terrified and still high, I cut through the grass of the park to get to the main road more quickly, thinking that I would lose them that way. These guys raced right over the speed bumps and around the bends in the park road right up to the main road, and they were driving so fast that I would have gotten T-boned if I didn't smash the pedal to the floor at the right time. I am so stressed, and I start silently crying while driving, thinking of how horrible the possibilities could be. Contact wearers know that when your eyes are dry from the smoke, then they rapidly get moist. Contacts tend to drift a bit until they find their place again. This is definitely not ideal for someone with awful vision, driving twice the speed limit down a road in the middle of town. So I started turning down residential streets and weaving in and out, being tapped on the shoulder by Blaze to keep my speed up because the two were still right on my rear bumper. I even made some risky U-turns and they followed right along. This chase lasted over 10 minutes of me frantically driving through main streets, residential, back alleys, and everything that I could try to get away. I was so scared that the best case scenario ended in us getting pulled over and myself obtaining a permanent record or DUI by the ripe age of 15. Luckily, a stroke of luck and a surprisingly quick reflex came to my aid. Blaze yelled, "Cop!" and pointed to a parking lot to our left, where there was a police cruiser probably just waiting to catch someone speeding or running red lights on the semi-busy road that we ended up on. I whipped into the parking lot and parked a couple stalls down from the cop. The truck prepared to turn, but stopped in the middle of the road so quickly, Once he realized what was going on and that the car following him had to swerve and pop the curb. Catching the officer's attention, he backed out, and the two vehicles split different ways and were out of sight before he got out of the parking lot. Never went back to that park any time other than mornings after that. So thankful that nothing bad came of the incident and that we made it out completely unscathed. I had no idea what they would have done, but people engaging teenagers in a car chase could not have good intentions in mind. It was my first time in my life being sexually harassed too. You would think being in a car chase might be fun or exciting, but I just felt so powerless and like I had no control, like nothing I could do would both get these guys away from us and simultaneously not get me arrested. I just discovered this sub today on my main account, but I was nervous to post this from it due to the nature of it. And I still wouldn't go anywhere near that place during the afternoon again. My husband and I had been married in May, but he was still living in student housing until his lease was up, which ended up being in August of 2019. We found the perfect sized apartment for our needs in the city his school was located. It was kind of a sketchy area. Despite most of it looking decent, there was definitely some questionable activity going on at all times of the day. To make the situation worse, we didn't have a car at this time, and so we had to walk and ride the city bus wherever we needed to go. It felt unsafe to me since I've only ever lived in small towns growing up. One night, the unsafe feeling really kicked into high gear when we had to get groceries on foot. On the way home to our apartment, we cut through a darkened parking lot. A man emerged from between two buildings that were just on the edge of the parking lot. He had the worst vibe about him, and that made me go on high alert. My husband tried to calm me down by being the rational person he is. Maybe it was just a coincidence? I continued to look over my shoulder, and sure enough, every turn we made, he made. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end at this point, and I looked at my husband and I told him that this man was definitely following us. He was taking each turn we were, and he stayed far enough away from us to where it wouldn't look too suspicious. I told my husband that, even though we were tired and had groceries, that we needed to take a different route home. He continued following us for another block or so, and that is when we decided to book it. We turned down a random street, found a car, and squatted behind it. When the man turned the corner, he was looking every which way for us, and every time he came close to the car we were hiding behind, we would slowly and as quietly as we could sneak to the other side. I called up my mom in tears, trying to stay as quiet and as calm as I could. Yeah, looking back, maybe calling the cops, even on a suspicion, would have probably been better. Anyway, thank God, the man eventually gave up. Once we knew that he was for sure gone, we ran and walked the rest of the way home and locked the door the minute we shut it. It felt like my husband and I were in a thriller horror movie and that we were the main characters trying to survive. I don't know what that man's intention were, and I don't want to know. So, to the creepy shadow lurker, let's never meet. I've been reading on here tonight, and I have a few creepy encounters of my own, so I figured, why not? This happened like 12 years ago, I was 14 and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation and we were hanging out, just the two of us outside. Midday. We lived in a smallish town where during weekdays it was pretty empty because adults were at work. Anyway, we'd been messing around, picking flowers and other random crap when we decided to cut through a massive field of underdeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea because it was a really bumpy, potted land that other kids and teens left all sorts of shit laying in. Well, our bad decision came around and bit us. We hadn't made it very far in the field when my sister got two bad things at once. Some sort of twisted metal, I don't know, maybe an old piece of a tool? It pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot, and right after it happened, she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on the uneven ground. She started crying and howling, and I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep, and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore, obviously. And our parents weren't available. I didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. Shit. My sister was still on the ground crying, and I was trying to calm her down when something made me feel like looking up. It was the feeling of being watched. Out of the field, across the road, and standing on the corner in the distance, was some random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly, and all I could tell for sure was that he was blonde, probably adult, and dressed too warmly for July. He was all alone, stock still, just staring at us. And I've always been a skittish horse, so I looked back at my sister and basically said to get on my back, and that I was carrying her home and that we were leaving right now. Now, I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field on my own crappy flip-flops with my crying sister on my back. Luckily, she was tiny, but I was no linebacker either. It had rained a day ago, and the field had puddles of slimy water in the low spots. We were both kind of wet from her falling when she got hurt, and I swiveled back to check if he was still watching us. And he was. Not only was he watching us, but he'd crossed the road and entered the field. Now he was standing stock still again and just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't describe it. One of the scariest moments of my life at that point. And my sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I just shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it. I need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following us again. Just be quiet." So that's what we did. I started walking again as fast as I could without getting hurt, and my sister watched him while I carried her. After less than a minute, she whispered to me that he was following again. "How fast?" "Just walking." "Is he watching us?" "Yes." I told her to tell me if anything changed and kept going. I stomped through puddles I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I even lost a flip-flop in the mud and just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field when my sister whispered what I least wanted to hear. He was speeding up. I turned us right around so we were facing him head-on, and as loud as I could, I yelled something like, "Hey, we see you. Fuck off and leave us alone. I'll call the cops." Nothing. He'd stopped again when I stopped, but gave no sign whatsoever that he'd heard me. Just nothing. I turned us around again and kept going, and my poor little sister was shaking like a leaf and just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, and there was nothing that I could do but keep going. Eventually, He started following again at a slow pace. I finally made it into our suburb and out of the muddy field and onto solid concrete. I told my sister to hold on tight as she could, and I booked it. I started running with her on my back as fast as I could. We couldn't see him anymore and didn't know what he was doing or where he was, and I was going to make it to our house or die trying. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far, and my bare foot was all scratched up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, with my sister looking out behind us. It felt like my heart was going to burst. The fear and suspense was awful. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard and up the drive, put down my sister, who'd started crying again, and my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely use my key. We made it in safely and called my mom. She had us lock every door and window and came rushing home. But nothing happened after that, and he never found us. We never saw him again, and that's the end. I have no idea who he was or why he was fucking with us like that, but it gives me chills to this day. The way he'd stop when I stopped and the way he ignored my yelling. I don't know what he wanted or what he was doing, and I don't want to know. This happened literally a month ago, back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while for various reasons. We live separately in one of the larger cities in the north of Middle America, and there's a decently sized population of college students like me to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night, I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup, when I got a message from a guy who was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so I agreed to go to his place. He lives quite literally down the street from me, and I could see his building from my window. So I walked over, and he let me up into his apartment. We made small talk and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, but just different. An odd twitch in his hands when he gripped the banister, the vacancy of his eyes when he smiled, and I'm not so cliché as to say felt evil or anything like that, but I wasn't exactly surprised that after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was to tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle, and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there staring, and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter, and went, "Oh shit, man, I should have asked. You cool with that?" I'm not a good Christian boy. I have broken into a church while tripping on LSD, and I had sex on a headstone back in high school. But I have my standards, so I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on, and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry. You don't gotta go. We don't gotta fuck. Do you want to watch Transformers 3 with me or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away down the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs, barefoot, in pajama pants and a t-shirt, until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was still standing there in the doorway watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of doom or weirdness. I grew up in Missouri, and junkies barely register as odd to me by this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now, you might have guessed it, but I've never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of my neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mixture of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my paramour's building, all in one street. So it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I would leave for work in the afternoon, and he'd be on the other avenue across from my building strolling along. Or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A couple times I saw him walking across the campus mall. My apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice, I'd notice him in the grocery store I work at as a barista, but it's the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February. Eventually, I started noticing he'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He'd never approach the coffee stand within the store where I work, but he'd look at me. A couple of times, I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day, late February, I worked an early shift, and when I got off, I felt a little crazy from lack of sleep, and I reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. And on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was the guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant deductive analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room window. Then looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension as we stared each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude didn't give off any evil or dark vibes, and I've met people that do. Now, what I saw in this guy's eyes, in his face, was much more human and much scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain, and anger. He hurried after me, but I'm a 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he was a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself in through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set, tried to open the second, and tried pushing the handicap button to open them, and then gave up. "Look, man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass of the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my heel and stomped over to the elevator. When I turned back, he was gone out into the snow. I didn't see him for a couple weeks afterwards, which is nice because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past this dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go smoke. One night, my boyfriend was over at my place. He'd just gone out for a smoke before he went to bed, and he mentioned that he wanted me to come with him the next time he went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close to me while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled into my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands on the corner across the way, and he stares at the building. One time, he asked me for a cig, and I told him that I didn't have one, when I had one literally in my hand." He laughed, kissed my chin, and passed out. I laid there awake and troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was deeply asleep, meaning about after 5 minutes had passed, I extracted myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night, and I could see across the street. Under the orange glow of the streetlight was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved, and I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend because he was either gonna immediately go to the police, which I hate doing, or he'd try and defend me. And while I love him with my entire heart, I don't want to watch a fight between a junkie stalker and my underweight nicotine-addicted boyfriend. So I kept it to myself and still haven't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went outside to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down a side street. Sometimes he'd watch from a distance. And sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend never noticed, and I kept my composure and nothing happened. One night, though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke, like normal. When we'd reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us, about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check, and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me that I had to get back inside. "Hey, babe," I said quietly to my boyfriend. "Let's get back inside, yeah? I'm cold." "Aw, baby," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Okay, I'm almost done anyway." We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning, I knew the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the usual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back up to my apartment, and he got changed for bed while I grabbed some water. So, I never lived in an apartment before, and I don't know if it's odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone in each unit that rings when someone wants let in. Ours never rings unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just some asshole playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted that without a struggle, and we lay down in bed. After he was soundly out, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a couple things, and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, my fanboy was out there in the parking lot. He waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey man, what do you want?" I said flatly. "Look man, I feel like we ended things awkwardly last time and I just wanted to talk to you," he said. "So you stalked me?" "What?" He started to look angrier, his brows furrowing. "Nah, man, I didn't stalk you. I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now, you're walking around out here with that skinny little bitch boy trying to rub it in my face, and I don't fucking appreciate that. Look, man," he said, smiling again, stepping closer. "You wanna go talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight, please? I won't shoot up or nothing this time." He took another step closer to me, and I saw, in his right hand, a dull gleaming piece of metal, a folded-up switchblade. He smiled at me, and I stepped back, shaking my head, and his smile drained away into a deep scowl. "Bitch, I'm done asking. You're gonna come over to my place now and finish what we started," he growled, unfolding the knife and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8" tops and skinny, and I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and regularly lifts weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife, which I drew from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife and then back at his and smiled again. "Bro, I was just playing. We can just talk right here, bro. I don't..." "Leave me and my boyfriend alone," I said very quietly, "or I will cut your face off and eat it." "What the fuck?" "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school," I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, holding my knife level. He backed away, quickly, almost falling on the ice, until he was full sprinting back to his place, and I was chasing him down with my knife, until he crossed the street and I stopped. I slid the knife in my pocket and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend I just had to go pee, and fell asleep. So, nameless horny junkie, let's not meet again, or I will eat your face. The events that I'm about to tell you happened when I was just 18 years old, fresh out of school and living on my own for the first time in my life. Looking back at this situation in hindsight, I should have gone to the police. I worked at a children's clothing store called Justice. I was working a typical shift from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. when a pretty atypical customer strolled into the store. Right off the bat, he gave off major creep vibes. He was a dirty, smelly, upper middle-aged balding guy who didn't even have a child in tow. Definitely not something I was used to seeing in that particular store. He didn't seem genuinely interested in the merchandise, only feigning interest in a few of the displays anytime that I would look over at him. I could feel his eyes on me, and as soon as I would go back to facing or stalking though. The manager, also picking up on his sketchy vibes, scared him off with her aggressive hospitality. I found it super weird that he refused to make eye contact with her while she asked him if he needed any help finding anything. He just shook his head no and left in a hurry. I saw him walk past the storefront once or twice after he left, but since this Justice store was located in a strip mall, it wasn't that weird, so I didn't give it a second thought. I made a mental note though, and since at that point the whole staff had begun talking about the greasy old sketchball, and my manager, who had been eagle-eyeing him the whole time, pulled me aside and confirmed to me in private that my suspicion had been correct. He had been staring at me any time that I wasn't looking at him. That had happened considerably early in my shift, and by the end of the day, after dealing with multiple Karens, which was a daily occurrence working at Justice, the sketchball was far from my mind. I clocked out, headed out into the parking lot, got into my car, and started the 7-mile drive home. About halfway home, I looked into my rearview mirror to see a white truck with a plow on the front of it behind me. The only thing that struck me as odd at first was it was midsummer and this person had a plow on the front of their Toyota, and the windows were tinted so dark that I could barely make out an outline of the driver. I suddenly got a sinking feeling as I remembered sketchy greasy guy. I decided to see if I was just being paranoid or if this person was trying to follow me. I'm sure I'm not the only paranoid person who is trying to make a bunch of nonsensical turns to shake a theoretical tale. Only unlike all the other times that I've played Shake the Tail, this person actually managed to stay on me. After about the 5th turn down a random avenue, my gut twisted into knots as I watched the Toyota slowly creep around every corner that I rounded. I had circled the block twice, and still the white truck with a plow and tainted windows was behind me, but far enough away that I still felt like I was just being crazy. I decided to try one last test to determine for sure if this was a trick of my imagination or actually something to be worried about. I winded my way out of the avenues, deciding to pull off to the side of the road into a little dirt turnaround beside a local bar, hoping and praying with all my might that the truck would just go by, but still clinging to the slimming chance that this was all in my head. I let out an audible gasp as the white truck slowly pulled up right behind me now. I saw the driver's side door open and I floored it out of there before I saw anything else. Heart racing at this point, I floored it back up a different set of avenues, finally stopping at a stop sign where I felt sure that I was in the clear. To my horror, I heard the hunting roar of an engine with its pedal to the metal, and seconds later, seeing the white truck with the plow on the front coming so fast up the avenues that it launched slightly into the air as it passed me at the intersection, flying down the perpendicular no-outlet road. I took my chance and turned left onto the road the truck had just come from, figuring they were going to have to turn around in someone's driveway before continuing the pursuit. I drove white knuckle, clenching the steering wheel the whole drive back to my town, constantly checking my rear view for the white truck that I never saw again. I even circled my own block for an hour after that, fearing that person was out there somewhere, watching me, waiting to see which house I pulled into. Once the situation was over, I naively brushed it off without so much as a police statement. The more time went by, the more the whole situation seemed like a bad joke. I never found out who was in the truck. That person might not have been connected to the greasy sketchball guy at all. At that time, I didn't take the incident very seriously. When I got home, I told my ex-boyfriend and he shrugged it off, so I did too. It wasn't the first creepy thing to happen to me, or the last. Disturbing to think that it's not uncommon for young girls or boys to find themselves in similar situations. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my awesome patrons: Fire05, Gabro, Maskino, Ralph, Lori, Jake, and Eskimono. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.